The 19th century was a time of great optimism in the ability of man to control nature and his own destiny. There were great strides in physical science, but religion was being neglected. It was a period of increasing strain. In the 19th century lived Darwin, Mendel, Marx and Freud. In 1825, Our Lady appeared to St. Bernadette at Lourdes, telling her, "I am the Immaculate Conception." Meanwhile, science was beginning to be thought of as something opposed to religion, instead of a way of learning about God's creation. So in 1825, Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species. This book challenged the then almost universal belief that God had created the world during 7 days in 4004 BC. It also suggested that species could evolve over time, although his book was called The Origin of Species, he doesn't actually explain the origin of species. It caused a great uproar in Protestant countries, but much less noticed in Catholic countries who were more interested in Our Lady of Lourdes. There's another reason for that. The sola scriptura of the Protestants, that the Bible is the authority alone, backed them into a corner, and they couldn't admit that there was more than one possible interpretation of the Bible. Otherwise they'd have to ask, who has the authority to decide it? They wish to believe that the Bible itself is the authority. This is not a workable hypothesis, but it's being held to this day. The Catholics, on the other hand, had a much more intelligent approach to the Bible, and they realized that there might be more than one way to take the meaning of the Bible, and that the real meaning of the Bible might not be so obvious just to pick it up and read it. And the Catholics have always been prepared to believe in evolution guided by God's providence, once the idea of evolution had come about at all. Now, one big key part missing from Darwin's theory was to know how things are actually inherited. His book didn't know that. His book didn't explain that because it was not known. And it was actually discovered by Gregor Mendel, an Augustinian monk, who published in 1866 the results of his breeding experiments. They were very, very, very careful experiments. He bred things like pea plants and looked at how things were inherited, yellow and green, tall and short, round and wrinkled peas, and so on. And he deduced the whole science of what we call genetics, and he was unknown to Charles Darwin. In 1829, the penal laws were repealed due to the influence of Daniel O'Connell. Karl Marx taught that the dominant ideas of a nation at any time are determined by the economic situation, and that the course of history is a fixed and predictable process like something in physics. The medieval attitude was that God created people with different gifts, who each had their own place in society, some higher in social rank and some lower. But medieval servants of a large household ate at the same table, ate the same food as their employers. The purpose of life was to fulfill your place in life so as to go to heaven. Marx denied God and declared that a conflict between upper and lower classes would end with the victory of the lower classes, to be followed by a classless society and a paradise on earth. What he preached, in effect, was a religion that denied God. He deliberately stirred up divisions among the classes of society, encouraged the poor to envy and hate the rich, and helped destroy the idea of a nation as one large family. His ideas had a powerful attraction to millions, especially those who had been, as I said before, treated like farm animals in industrial slums, and they rose in armed conflict against the so-called upper classes and against religion. His scheme is often named Marxism or Marxist communism. Sigmund Freud was a highly successful psychologist. He cured many people of their mental illnesses and founded the discipline known as psychoanalysis. He was the first to realize that we have a subconscious mind, Many of our thoughts, although real, are hidden from our consciousness. His teachings, however, ignored the existence of God and were seen by many as a means of escaping the need to involve God in our understanding of the mind. Many of his ideas were also quite shocking to those who thought of man as a rational animal with an immortal soul. Freud fully supported the 19th century idea that religion had been used for primitive society but could now be dispensed with in favour of reason and science. In the middle of the 19th century was the terrible potato famine. The cloudy and muggy weather all over Europe throughout 1845 led to the uncontrollable spread of the parasitic fungus Phytophthora infestans, which was lethal to the potato plant. The Irish population was reduced to nearly one half by starvation and emigration within just a few years of this famine, while the landowners insisted on taking away the other food which Ireland was still producing in abundance: wheat, vegetables, beef, mutton. Yet, it's an historical fact, through all this terrible suffering, the Irish people never lost their faith in God and their devotion to the Catholic faith. Not one priest is known to have apostatized during the famine. But they began to lose all faith in the Irish language and the future of Ireland as a nation. Many thought the only thing to do was to learn English and then emigrate. Later in the 19th century, Our Lady appeared to 15 simple Irish people at Knock in County Mayo. She said no word. She gave comfort to faithful Ireland simply by being there. All through the 19th century, the popes warned against the wrong direction that civilization was taking. Factory workers and poor people were being treated more cruelly and heartlessly than ever before. Yet the rich owners were told this was the way things ought to be. The Manchester materialists picked up Charles Darwin's ideas on evolution and the survival of the fittest to justify their oppression of the weak, which was something Darwin had never thought of. The popes wrote very strongly against modernism, which one pope called the synthesis of all heresies. Also, all during the 19th century, the popes were denouncing the Masonic order in the very strongest terms as the arch enemy of the Church. In 1893, the Gaelic League was founded by Douglas Hyde to revive Irish culture, language, sport and traditions.